at the root of it all, there's a moral crisis. At the root of it all, America needs to return to her faith. Alexis de Tocqueville said, America is great because America is good. And if America ceases to be good, she will cease to be great. And I think we're at that point now in our history.
Welcome back to the Herland Report. Bishop Harry Jackson, your work takes you in and out of the White House and among the prominent members in the American society. You hold a business degree and an education from Harvard Business School, and you have been featured in the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, the Washington Post, and you are also the senior pastor of Hope Christian Church in Maryland. So we're so honored to have a reverend here. First and foremost, you are somebody that cares about humanity and cares about the suffering and cares about those who experience injustice. We are discussing today the subject of Donald Trump and the border walls. And we found it particularly interesting to see in his speech to the nation during the stand-up with Congress that he's actually attacking the illicit drug industry, which is dependent upon the borders remaining open.
Well, I think this is an enigma or puzzle, what's going on right now. Because the defining our borders was a major issue that many of the Democrats believed in a few years back. Now there seems to be a shift in the narrative, and he's being demonized. And I'll tell you exactly what's going on. There's a play for the White House in the next few years in which the storyline is going to be this. The Democratic Party in America wants to paint President Trump as an intolerant racist, followed by and empowered by people with a kind of neo-Nazi racist roots. That's how they want to paint him. And for years, many of our liberal politicians in America have emphasized the fears of minority groups or different segments of our population. So they play on the fears of the blacks, fears of the Hispanics, fears of single women, fears of the poor, fears of people who are in our community. And the immigration issue is what many progressives feel is going to be the issue that brings a majority of the Hispanic votes home permanently to their party. So they want to say one thing and do another. They want to act like they're for these Hispanic and even other national immigrants. But the truth is they're pandering to them, and I could talk in some detail about the real things that need to happen in immigration if we were going to really be serious about the interest of the people trying to immigrate. But essentially, the Democrats are playing a political game which has a narrative, paint Trump like the devil is what they want to do and appear to be heroes.
Because it's puzzling to us coming from Europe and looking at these issues, because when you look at the southern border, how can the Democrats actually support criminal activity that goes on there? There's a lot of human trafficking, and we have hundreds of thousands coming across that border.
Yes.
That also end up, once they're in the United States, to push the wage level down. So it seems that the Democrats are saying one thing, yet supporting illegal activity.
Yes, they are doing exactly that. But let's pick apart each one of those statements. Let's start with lowering the minimum wage and the wages of people re-entering the job market or beginning. One of the things I've been involved in is criminal justice reform. And we find that people who've been in prison in America, we're 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's incarcerated population is in prison in America, right, at federal or local levels. It's a huge thing. Once you've been to prison, if you want to re-enter, you have to be retrained, and these entry-level jobs would be places where minority folks just starting out, summer jobs could get these jobs, or people re-entering from prison. But the idea that the Democratic Party doesn't have any sensitivity and wants to act like there's no problem with the lowering of wages by illegal immigrants, they're simply trying to get the kind of votes for presidential elections. Most African Americans are not aware that they're going to hurt the reentry opportunities of former incarcerated people. The First Step Act that President Trump was in favor of just got passed at the end of 2018, has some retroactive aspects to it where they will take away some of the overdone sentencing that people have had, and folks who have been incarcerated, mostly blacks and Hispanics in the American system, those guys will be able to come out, but their main problem is, where do we find a house and where do I get a job? With the illegal alien population very high, oftentimes the kinds of laborer jobs, unskilled jobs, they can't get. I want to add one more thing. Illegal immigration is the new slavery in America. Think about it this way. If I'm Hispanic and I'm in a meatpacking plant, that industry was rife with folks who were allowed to come into the nation illegally and then working with falsified documents. These folks often, if they're hurt on the job, injured or even killed on the job, where do they go? You can't go and get benefits from an insurance company because you're not supposed to be here. Your family's not going to get any money because of your loss of your entire life. And the fat cats who run the businesses that play on these loopholes are making money, but they're not going to get prosecuted. So what we have is an uneven application of law, but a powerfully convincing narrative. And the narrative is this: Trump and people like him are evil. They hate brown-skinned people. That's why they're enforcing these immigration laws. And it simply is a very believable lie, but a lie nonetheless.
And it's amazing when you look at the annual revenue from the drug industry in the United States. I mean, we remember well the 1930s and the Chicago Mafia and the mobsters and all of that.
Yes.
When you look coming into the 1950s, how the use of narcotics started to sift in as an industry into the United States, even back then, those mafia bosses used to say, okay, sell it, but don't do it near schools or don't do it near places where the children are. And I think from then on, we've seen a skyrocketing business pertaining to the drug industry. And for sure today, I think around 27 million Americans are on illicit drugs alone. So somebody completely forgot to think about the children and the young. And somebody's earning billions. And I'm just wondering, to what degree does that coincide with President Trump's effort now to stop that illegal drug industry coming into the United States from the South?
Well, he's working on that issue. I've got to tell you a story. A few years ago, I was in Mexico City. I was sitting next to then Vice President of the country, and another part of the table was the President of Mexico. As we sat there with Christian leaders from around the globe talking about issues, the man who was sitting next to me, also a Harvard-trained PhD, began to talk about how many guns were illegally in Mexico, that the amount of guns that the criminals had versus the policemen, the criminals had superior firepower and superior numbers of guns, and how dangerous it was. Well, within 6 months, the man I was talking to was assassinated. And we don't realize in the United States, what you're saying is that there is a militarily armed criminal cartel that is bringing drugs from these southern borders into America. And it's almost like we have evil armies who originate in multiple South American, Central American countries that are making billions of dollars. And the way the borders are now being maintained, protected, observed, actually facilitate their illegal operations. That is not commonly known. So if the Democrats say, on one hand, this is racism, and then Mr. Trump tries to bring up what he feels are the facts, he's seen as a hate monger. But if we were to talk about the number of guns in these countries and the firepower of these illegal cartels, it would stagger the minds of most Americans. They're just uninformed, and they're under the sway of a kind of hypnotic presentation based on lies and not based on truth.
When you look at history as well, and in the 1950s, 40s, 50s, 60s, the way also that Italian mafia structure in the United States started to put their money into bonds and stocks, both in Europe, and we know about the collusion after Second World War, you know, how the Vatican was into this as well, and the CIA, because of course at the time we were fighting the communists in the East. So there were these other groups came into that, and the mob too. And when you look at South America, the way it was heavily influenced, both Cuba and Rio de Janeiro and many places influenced by those kind of attitudes. One wonders, you know, what has happened since. Because it really basically is an American problem, is it? It's predominantly an American and a European and a Western problem that the drugs flow in and numb the nation and frankly, you know, does so much harm to whole generations here.
Well, it really does, but what happens, if you look a few years ago, they used to talk about people who are prime to become drug addicts, and they'd say what you need is time, free time, you need excess income, and America and many places in Europe have people who can even afford to spend money on recreational, quote, quote, drugs. And one of the problems is, in order to sustain the impact of these drugs, people begin to lust for, desire more and more powerful versions of those drugs. So in America, it's the opioid crisis. And the opioids coming in become, they're rich men's habits. So there have to be wealthy nations that have people with free time and money who are willing to invest in these illicit activities. And at the root of it all, there's a moral crisis. At the root of it all, America needs to return to her faith. Alexis de Tocqueville said, America is great because America is good. And if America ceases to be good, she will cease to be great. And I think we're at that point now in our history.
Looking also at the Speaker of the House of Representatives here, Nancy Pelosi, we found it most remarkable that she would say it is immoral to stop the illegal immigration. It is, in other words, immoral to follow US law. It is immoral to support the legal immigrants. There's just a lack of logic in this to me.
Well, there is and there isn't. Let me talk about their narrative, and then we can debunk it and say where it's wrong. Their narrative at root says this: many people coming from the southern borders especially, and some of the borders from the Middle East and other places, are coming because of the need for a refugee status. In other words, they're in danger back home. And because of their danger, we have to let them in. They fail to declare, and I've been to some of our places where we are housing some of the kids who have been allowed to come into the States and are being actually cared for in places like Virginia here. And some of these kids actually got kidnapped. Their families often are being challenged to bring ransom money so that kids aren't killed. As I was looking at this beautiful place that a famous American, Joe Gibbs, a former coach of the Washington Redskins, had a series of homes that have now become the holding places for some of these kids. I noticed many of the little girls that were there were 3-4 months pregnant. And they've been raped, brutalized by some of the people who brought them into the country. So these people who prey on human weakness and are also taking advantage of these little girls and these little boys. And so there is this narrative that the American left holds strong to. They say the same thing over and over again. It sounds like truth. The reality is far from it. And until more people talk like you do about the facts, we're going to have a disconnect. And it's going to continue to cause or empower these hijackers, these human traffickers, even these drug lords, these folks who are crossing these barriers with malicious, malevolent, evil intent to continue to do their evil work.
I wonder what we're seeing, is it actually the fight between the old world order, the nation state, national sovereignty. We see how Trump fights for America. He fights for the American worker. He wants to take back the jobs. He wants the ultra-rich to start paying taxes in the United States.
Yeah.
You know, so it's the old, so-called old world order compared to the new world order, which would be the globalist system, the borderless system, the non-nation-based system, the transnational business model system, which can only thrive in that kind of segment. Because what we see all over the world today is that many of these transnational, extra large corporations actually come in, Starbucks, for example, as one, Coca-Cola, you know, you have them.
Yes.
They come, and some of them are so mighty that once they enter a country, they really start controlling. Some of these multinational companies are so large, they're much larger than the GDP of the particular country they're entering. So they come in with a lot of money, and they are dependent on having those kind of open border societies.
Well, I think you're articulating the problem quite well. The philosophical shroud or the idea behind what these people are saying is different. What gives them power is, I'll say this very bluntly, I don't mean to be unkind, but the lie that I tell, the rationalization I give seems plausible, it hides the motives. So what, from a spiritual point of view, I'm a preacher, so I look through a biblical lens. I see that there is an anarchistic kind of desire behind it, meaning that if certain parties, this new world order, believes that the way countries are run now is evil, Many of these things they advocate for are designed to break the power and the structure of what we're going to call organized Western styled government. And you're right, so we tear down borders and boundaries. And you say, isn't protecting your sovereign borders, isn't that part of the number one or two charters of a nation? That there's a definition, a boundary you're supposed to protect. There's culture, mores, as well as economics that you're supposed to watch over. Aren't we supposed to have strategically organized exchange between countries? None of that sounds wild or bizarre, but this anarchistic view is saying, let's break down the borders, let's cause countries to cave in upon themselves, let's destabilize the way countries work, starting with economic disempowerment. This all sounds like a crazy James Bond 007 movie where the guy who's become fanatical and insane says, I'm going to take over the world, and I'm going to do it by destabilizing the economies of the world. That is a common James Bond movie theme. Unfortunately, it's becoming reality today.
And when looking at globalism and the effects of globalism, entering the scene around 1990, and thus giving us that type of transnational, international business economic model that departs from the nation-based capitalist structure, which had the rule of law within each country.
Yes.
For example, making sure that when outsourcing jobs, there was some distribution of wealth. And there were laws so that whichever company that functioned within that particular nation, for example, violating the rights of the workers in that particular country, I mean, it was really a different system, and we have departed from that into a globalist system. And this globalist system has led to, according to Oxfam, around 60 individuals in the world now own over 50% of world assets.
Wow.
And this is amazing.
Can you repeat those stats for me? It's hitting me. How many individuals?
Around 60 individuals, or
60.
even lower,
Yeah.
now own more than 50% and even higher of world assets.
Wow, that's amazing.
And when you look at the American mainstream media, is owned by only 6 corporations, many of them connected to the military complex, obviously. That means to say that there's a high probability these very few individuals are controlling much of the mainstream media and turning it into coming across as what benefits ultra-rich elite in the world. That is worrying to me. You're talking about the enslavement of, or the re-enslavement of groups. We could talk about the re-enslavement of the Western working class through such a system, or the re-feudalization. It's like a new feudal system that we're entering in.
I think that's a great way to articulate it, the re-feudalization, returning to a handful of people because of their wealth and placement and position, influencing the destiny of the entire world. And that's exactly what our political liberties, starting with the Magna Carta all the way through to the American Constitution, that's exactly what we fought. We fought the control of a small group of people. We fought a oligarchy controlling and dominating the destiny lifestyle of the masses of people. It's an interesting turn of events, and this is not a conspiracy theory that you're giving, meaning this is objectively what has been happening, consolidation of power and an agenda being put forth. I would challenge your listeners, though, and I know this is not a religious program, but to think that there is a reality in the world of good and evil. And that very statement could seem to be church language only. But you don't have to be someone who's fully aware of all the ramifications of your actions to have your action be classified as evil. Meaning, the people who are cooperating with how we're dealing with immigration, who don't want any borders, who want chaos in the countries, they may not see themselves as evil. They may not be in direct communication with drug lords or people that murder folk, but the agenda behind the ideologies we're talking about will have an evil output on our culture. So the cry for liberty, which people like Patrick Henry, if you know of him in the American Revolution, said, "Give me liberty or give me death." That kind of cry, I think, will be heard again. It's also the theme of some of the movies that we're seeing that are coming out more in the science fiction category, but we've got to make sure we watch out and take the side of people that are really proclaiming truth and human dignity and liberty. I don't want to get too deep into moral issues today, but I find that the anarchy, no borders, the things that, the policies that take advantage actually of illegal immigrants coming into the States. You come in with no rights, you come in being abused in the workplace. If you're hurt, harmed, you die, you have no recourse. Those kinds of policies are also teamed up with an anti-life policy, meaning we can abort a baby. After a baby's born, you can still kill it in a hospital. That's the kind of law that was passed in New York State recently. What kind of mindset and philosophy bursts these concepts? I say it's an evil, anti-God kind of mentality and sentiment.
Thank you very much, Bishop Harry Jackson, for taking some of your special time to be with her here and give us your thoughts on American current events.
Thank you for having me.